Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Gulsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Yeah. Welcome back, Colter.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Glad to see that Will found a turkey to put in the background since last time I was.
Yeah, I was driving the other day, and you know how on trash day people put stuff out on the curb. My neighbor had that out on the curb, and so
I thought you said you got it at a flea market.
Same difference.
I'm having a hard time keeping my story straight.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, well, it's glad to have you back, Colter. We've been getting a bunch of questions. I would say for updates specifically on Rios, we've gotten, I don't know, quite a few of them. I don't know if you have, Will, but I've gotten a few. So we wanted to invite you back. I know you're leading a bunch of really awesome work over there. And of course, we all enjoy having some time together. So for those out there, we forgot to click record, and we've been on here for about 2 hours. I'm kidding. It's a
good thing I blocked off the whole morning.
We have been on here for a minute talking.
49 of them to be exact.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
It's amazing what we could get done if we could stick to a schedule.
Yeah, I know it. Will said one time we should just click record every time we're talking. Because some nuggets come out of it every time that it's like, man, we should have recorded that.
Then you get some weird stories, though, where you're like, well, that's pretty boring or pretty dumb.
Well, we'd have to do a lot of chopping on that to get rid of some of that stuff.
I would say that there definitely are some golden nuggets that come out of it, but there's some turds, too. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, man.
Oh.
Well, Colter, we've also gotten a few requests for us to have fun with this and maybe tell a couple of stories and whatnot. And I know that you're an avid turkey hunter. All of us are. And you've got lots of good stories. So we were curious if we could start out before we kind of go into the science and updates, if you had a good turkey story that you could tell us.
Yeah. Man, there's quite a few, as you know. And I hadn't got to hunt with Will. Maybe we'll remedy that one day. But me and Marcus have hunted quite a bit together. North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. I think that's everything. So my favorite Alabama memory, so most of y'all, the listeners, know, I guess, that Marcus is from Alabama. And so he had places we could hunt there years ago when we were doing our PhD. And I forget the exact setup and everything. All I know is, as always, there were two toms on the wrong side of the property line. They were roosted off the property, but close enough that you're like, okay, we might still be in business here. But they were also across a creek, right? And everybody knows you're not supposed to be able to call them across a creek.
Well, that creek is actually a tributary off of the Sucarnochee River.
Oh.
So if some folks out there might know what that is,
okay,
but that's what that was.
Yeah. Well, I remember getting in, it's just the two of us, as I recall, and kind of getting into position and being a little miffed that they were like, well, they're far enough away from the line, like who knows what they're going to do. Plus, we got the creek to deal with, but there were definitely two of them, and we didn't have anything. You know how it is. At some point, you're like, well, this is the best we got going. Otherwise, we got to walk a half a mile back the other way, and so we set up on them and. I guess it's going to sound like a braggy story because all I did was talk, some sexy hen talk to them. Next thing we know, these jokers flew straight down from the limb. Like it was a couple 100 yards probably, glided all the way down, came all the way across the creek onto our property. We could hear them, as I recall. I couldn't see them land, but you knew they had landed.
Well, I think we both saw them in the air, right?
That's probably it. Yeah, I couldn't see them on the ground, but I knew they were on our side. And then, of course, the other hilarious and frustrating thing was we were set up just perfect because well, obviously they're going to work this little field road. It's graining up in the spring. They're just going to come right down this road, strutting or pecking along or whatever, and we're going to double because that's what we're going to do. And then those jokers just cut into the woods through this thick, nasty briar tangle where you could actually hear their feathers like scraping on branches. And so folks can't really see it, but you can envision Marcus is to my right. So they're now, instead of coming around in front of us, they're coming in hard to my right, which of course unsafe for me to even imagine doing something toward Marcus on the right. But they read the script other than coming through that briar tangle, and Marcus got an Alabama turkey. And you want to tell him what was unique about that turkey?
Yeah. Well, other than it was a great experience and a lot of fun, and they pitched across the river to come to us and all that. And then they turned into, it was a god awful mess. If you pointed, where's the turkey not going to walk, it was right there. And they walked all through it. I guess they were eating blackberries when they came through there. I don't know.
No telling.
But so the two of them come out. One of them is clearly the dominant gobbler, and he's full fanned and everything. But the other one was a longbeard, and I could tell that. And they were, I was trying to get set up where I could shoot either one of them. And the one that's exposed itself was the subordinate Tom, we'll just call him, since he was not strutting, and his head wasn't red, wasn't white or anything. It was just this little red head comes poking out and walks right into my scope. So then I shot it, longbeard. I don't care. And I don't know if you remember, but some of the brush or something caught some of the pellets, and it was weird because he started running. He was clearly injured, like it rolled him, but he got up and started running, and I had to chase him down and catch him.
Yeah.
And
meanwhile, the chance of doubling has long since gone away because the other one has stopped strutting and left the area. You know.
Yeah, he may have flew back over the river.
Probably never to return. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a bunch of shenanigans, like it just the way all of it worked out.
Yeah.
And then I got the gobbler, and then when I first grabbed it, there were no spurs. Yeah. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I've shot a hen! What's going on?" And then I realized, no, it's a longbeard. It's an adult gobbler, and he just was missing his spurs. I thought, oh, maybe it's a Jake. Nope, it wasn't any of that. It was adult gobbler, long beard. I think it was 11-inch beard or something. Yeah. It was a good beard on it. And I now have it in a shadow box in my office because it was so unique that was a pretty rare condition that apparently gobblers can just not grow spurs. And, I've talked to several folks from that area, and multiple people have told me that they have shot spurless gobblers around that area. So it makes you wonder if it's genetic.
Little piece of
some kind of
probably
something weird, some rare trait.
But I like to think it was just high grading. You were just culling him out. So maybe we could go back next year and get the other one. But
it's hard to imagine that those spurless gobblers get a chance to pass on their genetics that often. You think they'd be at such a disadvantage in a fight?
You'd think so. But I remember the gobbler was pretty normal otherwise.
Yeah, I remember he's normal. I forget the weight. I think we did weigh him, and he was normal weight for that time of year. Good body condition, nice beard, fan looked great. He was just spurless.
Yep.
So, yeah. But anyway, so that's my cool story.
Yeah. Well, that was a fun one.
Well, speaking of which, Marcus,
been over a decade.
You got on the board.
Yeah. Yep. I sure did. Opening day is another one of those things. It seems to always be some kind of ridiculous ordeal every time I go turkey hunting. I don't know how that happens.
You're the one common denominator with
that.
It's got to be
I have some thoughts, but we're going to need more time. Yeah.
For those of y'all that don't know, Marcus kind of flies by the seat of his pants.
Yeah. So we have had many a conversation. We're like, well, we're late again. Where are we going to go now? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, we should just go right here on the map. And there happens to be a turkey roosted right here.
Yeah. He's both the problem and the solution because we're usually running late because of him, and then we end up right under one because Marcus has got that golden horseshoe. There you go. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And it's funny because there's sometimes a little bit of a conflict between us because I tend to be more of a preparer and planner, and Colter, I think you're kind of the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Marcus is just over here, just taking it easy.
Like, why don't we just go right here, guys? Just trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate description of my general means of doing things like this. So anyway, I can tell you real quick about the opening day if y'all want to hear it.
Yeah.
So it was opening day in North Florida in the northern season, and I was kind of dejected. I had driven a long ways the night before. I didn't get home till like 1 a.m. and was planning to hunt on daylight the next morning, opening morning. Well, apparently it was hurricane season, so we just had this huge storm front come through, and of course Saturday and Sunday it was supposed to rain, thunderstorms all day long both days. So I was frustrated the whole drive home because it was a several-hour drive from Tennessee coming back, and looking at the weather's 100%, and it's like, man, we may as well not even go. And a couple of guys that I've hunted with a few times before on the same property, they live remotely, and they were going to drive up, and they just decided we're not even going to come up for a daylight hunt. And then I wake up the next morning at right at gobble time and look out the window, and it is just beautiful outside. They completely missed the weather.
You're like, man, this is the mistake.
So meanwhile, I'm texting with the other guys, and I was like, hey guys, like, it looks beautiful here. And I live, maybe 20 miles from the place where we hunt. They live a couple hours. And I was like, hey guys, come on. And they were like, dude, it's literally like thunderstorming and everything. So basically they start driving up and they get behind a wreck and all those different things, and it takes them extra hours, to get up there. And the whole time it's like a hurricane. And then they finally get up to just below my house on the, the highway, and it just cleared up. We got a little break in the weather, and they didn't get up there until about, half afternoon or so. So we all go and meet out at the property, and there was a bunch of turkeys in multiple groups in some fields, and we slipped in there in the middle of a couple of fields that we knew that they hung out in a lot, and got in a strip of woods in there. And that by this time it's 1:30, and one of the guys is really skilled caller, and he starts calling at some birds, and they started gobbling at us and started doing their thing. It was 3 longbeards and some hens, and long story short, we sat there and messed with them for about an hour, and then finally the hens kind of decided they were going to move on, and the 3 gobblers peeled off of them and came into the woods, and we doubled on them 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Man. That's a page right out of the book of Craig Harper, Turkey Hunting Strategy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Get out there late morning.
Yeah, he talks about that a lot. He loves getting out there late morning and hunting during the middle of the day like that, and particularly between the storm fronts, and and they were gobbling. We were hearing a lot of gobbles.
That's awesome.
So we were in it. We just happened to get in a good position and waited them out. They finally got curious and came in there. And then that one was also unusual because the reason there's a strip of woods there is because there's a drain, a big creek, and it's one that you can't walk across. Like, it's pretty tough, and they came across it to us.
That's awesome.
We took
nice.
It.
And you mentioned that's where you're at there in Florida would be a hybrid zone. Is that right?
Well, it's technically, if you look at the map, it's considered in the Osceola range.
Okay.
But the characteristics on it, I sent y'all some wing photos. I mean, it clearly has some eastern characteristics instead of Osceola.
Yeah, that's right. I guess that's right. The maps I've seen draw a harder line in Florida, whereas when we're about to talk about Oklahoma, they draw a pretty nice band of hybrid area for us to go from Rios to Easterns. So
yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you guys. I don't care what the subspecies
no,
is.
it turns out he don't even care if it's got spurs on it.
If it's a long beard with a full fan, then it's a trophy bird for me. So
there you go.
That's awesome.
That's what
hopefully I'll have a story to share next week.
Yeah, you got a big trip coming.
Yeah, getting started Friday, headed down to Texas. So
that's awesome.
We're here going to hunt Rios, and hey, we've got the Rio man or one of the Rio men on with us today.
Newfound Rio. I got my first Rio last spring.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to keep story time for next time.
We can do another one. Yeah. Hopefully we'll have a lot of stories. Of course, he'll probably go down there and there'll be nothing but storms for 5 days.
Well,
so Colter,
now I understand why you wanted the Rio update, Will.
That's right.
Right before you're going to go down there to get on one.
That's right. Yeah.
And off the air, Colter told me he would give me GPS coordinates on all of his birds.
Lucky for us, they're all hens, so that's not going to do you a whole lot of good.
Well, that's where the gobblers are.
Yeah, well, fair point.
So Colter, you're out at Oklahoma State for folks that haven't listened to the previous episode with you, and if they haven't, I highly recommend that they go back and listen to that one, because Colter, you provided some data from a very comprehensive analysis that you guys did to try to better understand turkey population dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also, that was more of a meta-analysis of already completed studies, but you've also got some current ongoing work where you guys are studying reproductive ecology on Rios there in Oklahoma, right?
Yep, Rios and Easterns both. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that's absolutely right. So that paper and that other episode we did was, like you said, a meta-analysis of stuff that's been published for the last 50 or 60 years. What Oklahoma did, and I'll just start with, I like to model things, so let's start with a definition. I'm going to say ODWC numerous times. That is our agency acronym in Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. And like so many states that y'all have been talking to now for the last few months, in recent years, they've, through several different metrics, kind of perceived a decline in turkey abundance, notably a decline in productivity. Whether or not that was coming from nest failure or poult survival was a bit of a question, but the poult per hen metric that I know y'all have talked about before on here, and a lot of turkey hunters have been used to seeing agencies talk about it, the poult per hen metric in Oklahoma has been in decline. So long story short, the agency decided that they wanted to fund turkey research to estimate some of those vital rates, like we used in that modeling paper that we talked about. But in this case, we're going to be actually doing like so many other states have already done. Trap some hens, put some backpacks on them, follow them through the nesting season to figure out nest fate, and then if a nest is successful, hopefully also capture poults and do poult survival to figure out cause-specific mortality of poults. And because Oklahoma, for those that don't know, I'm sure they could Google around and check out the NWTF maps and whatnot of subspecies distribution. But basically, we have the kind of eastern third-ish of the state is where the eastern subspecies resides. Then there's a labeled band, a known zone of hybridization there, where you've got eastern or Rio characteristics. And then as you move west in the state, you're fully Rio. And then technically, if you want to get real detailed, way out in the very western tip of our panhandle, there's actually a bit of range where we likely get Merriam's subspecies that we would share with areas in maybe Colorado or northeastern New Mexico. So officially on the books, Oklahoma would have 3 of the subspecies, but really we're talking about Rios and Easterns. And so ODWC says, hey, we want to look at this on both ends of the state, because those metrics I just mentioned, they weren't declining in just one place or the other. They were actually declining statewide. And though we had maybe different hypotheses as to why those declines are happening, for example, weather might be more of an issue out in the Rio country just because of the really cyclic spring conditions that we get out there. that might not be as true in extreme southeastern Oklahoma, where for folks that hadn't been there, you're thinking, well, in parts of our study area, think of the Ozarks. You're kind of closed canopy hardwood or mixed pine hardwood forests, ridges, that kind of thing. And then the further to the southeast you get, Oklahoma actually has a tiny little piece of coastal plain, believe it or not. And we even got alligators at Red Slough WMA. So, so just a real variety of conditions that a wild turkey in general can be subjected to, going from extreme southeastern Oklahoma and 50 something inches of rain per year, all the way out to western Oklahoma, where, in the panhandle, you're talking about 10 or 12 inches of rain per year. But even in southwestern Oklahoma, it would still be, maybe in the teens. So a lot of climatic variability, a lot of different storm systems that are kind of affecting those areas of the state. And then you layer on top of that a lot of increased interest in changing land uses. And so that kind of, all of that combined spurred ODWC to say, hey, we need to mark some birds and get a handle on this within our state to see what we might need to do, associated with harvest regulations or season setting or whatever. So that's what prompted all this.
So is the primary metric that they're looking at the hunter harvest? I mean, that you mentioned poult per hen ratios were declining as well, but is harvest declining?
It was a little bit for harvest decline, poult per hen declines, and one I didn't mention that's a bit more anecdotal, because I don't know exactly all the various surveys they have or haven't conducted, but there's at least anecdotal information from hunter reports. Just hunters not seeing as many. Yeah, not seeing as many turkeys, expressing some concern, and ODWC, I think, has been really responsive, actually, to listening to the constituents, in this case, mostly the hunting community, when these changes took place. And obviously, I don't work for ODWC, so I don't want to misrepresent anything that happened. But one of the stories that I heard when they decided to reduce bag limit, we used to have a 3-bird limit here in the spring, only 1 per county, but 3 birds statewide. And that has now been reduced as of last spring. So spring of 2022, that's down to 1. Well, the initial proposal that ODWC was going to make was to reduce it to 2. And actually hunters stepped forward and asked for a complete reduction down to 1. And so ODWC in part made that decision just because hunters were so engaged in the issues around turkeys, and actually called for a more extreme bag limit reduction. So I think, from that perspective, even if some of those data are anecdotal, I think ODWC has been trying to get their finger on the pulse, and in that case, those hunter reports, coupled with the actual data streams they're looking at, led to them putting out this call for proposals for what's now the big Oklahoma Turkey Project.
So, Colter, with the hunter harvest data, so let me make sure I heard you correctly. It is declining, maybe not steeply, but there is some indication of a decline in harvest. Is that corrected for hunter effort? And if not, do you have a feel for how the hunting effort is changing? Like, are we increasing hunting effort or decreasing the number of hunters?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the correct answer here is I don't know for sure on the corrections with effort. Although I know that on some of the WMAs, so some of the public lands that they manage, because of the some of them have kind of a sign in, sign out policy. So they're not draw hunts per se, but they've got more information there on effort, in the form of hunter days at minimum, and maybe some reporting on what hunters encountered. And there are some WMAs where I think those numbers became pretty concerning. Meaning
like there's a decline in effort?
Well, there was still the same amount of effort, but it was clear that the satisfaction was going down. And now in recent years, that has led to some anecdotal stories of, I know a WMA manager, I won't call anybody out here, but a specific WMA where a group of hunters has been coming for 20 years straight until last spring. And last spring was the first time they ever called that manager up and said, we love coming. We love using the campground. We just can't rationalize all the effort in the trip. And it's because that WMA, which is very well managed as a big time fire regime, a lot of active habitat management and invasive species control. I mean, it looks really good if you're just kind of going out saying, oh, it looks like there should be a turkey here. And so that manager had shared that story because he's really passionate about turkeys and recognizes that even with the stuff they've done on his WMA, the population just has kind of tanked. And in this case, that again, anecdotal story from one hunting group, but they came for nearly 20 years straight. And spring of 22 was the first year they called up and said, we can't rationalize coming and spending a week to quote turkey hunt when there's not hardly any turkeys there left to hunt. So yeah, again, just to summarize, I think the agency, they're doing the best they can with some of the data streams, which are coarse, as we know. But this project gives us an opportunity to get down in the weeds and hopefully try to evaluate some of the many variables that I mentioned a minute ago, both in a southeastern Oklahoma setting, which is going to be the eastern subspecies, and in southwest Oklahoma, which is going to be the Rio subspecies. So that's why Will's got me on. He just wants to hear about Rios.
That's right.
And I know the agency folks that run essentially, we don't really have a true turkey biologist in the sense that some states do. We have two different guys on two ends of the state. And I will say their names. Eric Suttles is Southeast Region Supervisor. He's the Eastern Turkey Coordinator. Call him Turkey Coordinator. I don't know what officially is. So he wears an extra hat, right? He's responsible for kind of the Eastern Turkey stuff, but his day job is actually to supervise the WMA managers in the Southeast region of Oklahoma. And then on the other end of the state, Marcus Thibodeau is a WMA manager at Pack Saddle WMA, and I believe he's got authority over Ellis County WMA as well. And so he's essentially the Rio equivalent. So they've got their finger on the pulse when it comes to those very specific reports that are coming out of the WMAs. And I know Eric in particular has shared information before it's really fun to get in the weeds on like non-resident hunting. I mean, we just talked about you going to Texas, right? Often those non-resident hunters are really serious, and they tended to be quite effective at actually maybe tagging all three of their birds. Somebody who's coming maybe all the way across the country to hunt in Oklahoma, well, they can get those three tags just like a resident can. They start to buy
probably not a novice.
Exactly. And so
when they also are probably more dedicated to trying to fill their tags.
Exactly.
That's an interesting point. I haven't really thought about that.
We talk about that a lot in my game species class so Eric actually comes and we do a unit, or I say a unit, a little module. It's kind of very turkey focused, and Eric comes in there to give the state agency perspective, and when he throws up some of those slides, that's why I'm kind of embarrassed. I don't remember the numbers, but I also don't want to just make them up and be wrong. But when he comes in and shares some of those slides, we have a lot of conversations about that. Like, oh, wow, like non-resident hunters are, I forget the proportion, but a notable proportion of the non-residents might actually shoot 3 turkeys. Yeah. Whereas very, very few residents actually shoot 3 turkeys.
Yeah. I wonder if that trend holds elsewhere. I don't see why it wouldn't, but I'm
really fascinated by it.
Yeah. I got a question today about that I fielded. Someone asking about non-resident hunting pressure, and I didn't know this at the time when I responded, but I basically validated that was a great question that they had, and that Florida is a really good example because a lot of the pressure on Osceolas comes from out of state. And I had not thought about what proportion of the tags get filled.
Right.
That's a good, really
good.
Yeah,
and like I said, if you want to be in the weeds later, I can certainly try to dig up, numbers for, if folks want to follow up with y'all about that. I'm sure much of that is shareable. I just don't have it all at my fingertips. But But suffice it to say, though, all those various data streams are what essentially spurred ODWC to join the current tidal wave of turkey research that's kind of occurring across southeastern U.S. And I would just say broadly, Oklahoma's weird because we're kind of southern Great Plains, but we're also kind of in the southeast, and we got a little bit of everything. But by and large, the rationale for why we're doing turkey work here is quite consistent with the rationale more broadly in the southeastern U.S., where these declines have become relatively prevalent and are now, fairly well documented to the point that agencies are trying to respond.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry, Will. I had a question that I was trying to ask earlier, and I gave way to you, but let me follow up real quick.
Your turn.
Is your perception or the state's perception that decline is similar across the subspecies?
That
was going to be my exact question, Marcus.
Well, look at that. Now y'all are even. You're back to even.
Seat of the pants right here.
So that's a good question. And my take on it, again, with the caveat being, I don't want any listener to think I'm representing the agency, but my take on that question from the university side is that yes, the declines are happening to both, i.e., the concern is there for both subspecies. That said, I think there are people that there's some sense that maybe some of what's happened, particularly in the Rio part of the state, is a bit more explainable due to ill-timed weather than some really novel thing that all of a sudden is impacting turkeys everywhere. Now, I'm saying that again for everybody so they don't misunderstand. That is a hypothesis. We don't know that to be true, but the two systems are very different. And Rios in other places tend to swing a little bit more, could be a little more boom and bust as a result of those really unique systems they live in that are, in our case, pretty arid, but also predisposed to really chaotic spring and early summer weather. Now, that said, we had a tornado go a mile south of our field site in southeast Oklahoma back in the fall. But I think that's, Marcus, I think that's the answer you're looking for, which is the patterns are really similar. We're not confident that the actual variables that matter are necessarily the same in both places, but for now, we're leaving everything on the table.
So it may be a different mechanism.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're seeing similar things.
Exactly.
Is it when you're saying the weather variability, are you talking about just in rainfall, or is there something else? Because that's what I'm thinking about.
Well, rainfall, which all that time of year. So in the spring, that's where they can get some big time rain with these systems that are also producing tornadoes, super high winds, and major hailstorms. Okay. So
we've got hens when it's bad. They're literally trying to sit through
right. We're talking about the kind of stuff
storm with hail.
Where this time of year, and actually they're calling for some storms maybe tomorrow, for example. And so you check the weather, and of course it's really fascinating now to live in Oklahoma and look at what they can do with radar and Doppler and all this stuff. Yeah. But we're talking about people turning in pictures to the news where they can only hold 2 hailstones in one hand. It's like 2 baseballs.
I could see where that'd be bad for a nesting hen.
Right, exactly. There's only, and if the hen leaves to save herself and one of those lands in the middle of her clutch, well, that's a lost nest, right? So that's why I think that's a bit more unique in the systems in western Oklahoma than maybe the really, really forested areas in southeast Oklahoma. But I know Dwayne Elmore, who y'all have had on here before, and who's the lead PI actually on this turkey project. I think it was last year. They had a prairie chicken up in the tallgrass prairie, so that's north of us here in Stillwater. A brooding hen, dead over top of her entire brood, which was all dead overnight, like in the spring. So she was literally died. I mean, people can't see me right now online, but she's got her wings out over the top of her now deceased brood, and she died with them in what was apparently a really bad rain/hailstorm. I don't know if they verified whether or not she was actually struck blunt force trauma, but exposure, if nothing else, due to an ill-timed storm when she's got an entire brood on the ground in the spring. and it killed her and all the young that year. So again, not trying to use hyperbole here to freak everybody out. This stuff has existed in Oklahoma forever, but understanding its relative influence to, say, population trajectory compared to changing land use practices, concerns about winter roost sites. So we'll want to ask about Rios. I'll use this quick little segue. One of the stories that we've gotten from multiple private landowners, game wardens, and even some of the biologists out in western Oklahoma is there are areas that were known to have big winter roosts, say sometime in the last 10 to 15 years. And they've watched the number of turkeys at that winter roost. In some cases, the examples were they would say there were 200, 250 birds there. Now there's 20, 30. Well, that's a big change. Now, of course, we got to document it. Did all those other turkeys die, or did they shift to? Are they having to move winter roost sites because of landscape characteristics that are now making those historic winter roosts unsuitable? And honestly, I think there might be a little bit of both. But without GPS backpacks and several years worth of data, it's really hard to parse that out. And just so folks, listeners know, we have been trapping Rios out there this year. This is the first winter right here, so winter of 2023, where we're trapping Rios, even though we started trapping Easterns last year. So we're in year 2 on the eastern side of the project. And there are still winter roosts out there that have 100, 200 birds. It's just there's anecdotal stories that when a landowner says, "Oh yeah, we used to have a winter flock in this drainage," and like now I struggle to find a turkey. Okay, well, did they just move or are they gone? Right. Those are very different. Yeah.
Well, and the other indicators, I presume, don't indicate that dramatic of a change where you've reduced it an order of magnitude. Like you're not
right. You're talking about like poults per hen is not 0, but it's not it's not where it was.
Well, I just like, or even the hunter harvest, like it hasn't dropped from.
No, it hadn't responded to that level. That's why we're interested in the idea that that landscape change may be contributing to not only where these winter roosts are, but that could also contribute to nest success in the form of access to, quality nesting cover or quality brooding cover. And one of the big questions on that end of the state is whether or not there are barriers to movement that could even disrupt things like gene flow. So I'm sure one of the questions you're jumping ahead maybe is, what all are we doing on the project? Well, since I just mentioned gene flow, one piece of the project that's actually statewide, so irrespective of subspecies, is being done by our partners down at Cesar Clayburgh Wildlife Research Institute at Texas A&M Kingsville. So Evan Tanner and Randy DeYoung have a PhD student down there that is looking at statewide genetics, with the main kind of big 10,000-foot view question being, what is our genetic connectivity like? What is gene flow like? Are there obvious barriers to movement? Because those things could interact with whether or not we're seeing loss of, say, winter roost sites, or whether or not we're seeing, no, they're just moving over here, but then once they're over here, do they have good nesting cover? That kind of thing. So there is a big genetics piece that's being handled, not at OSU directly, but with our partners down at CKWRI. So I think that could be really interesting. And so that's a hunter. I'll just put one plug in on that too while we're on the subject, that's hunter supported, because we're asking for hunters to give us a tiny, tiny little tissue sample to run the genetic stuff on. And so the folks down at CKWRI create these little kits and they ship them up here. And last year we had ODWC, NWTF, Cherokee Nation, Muskogee Creek Nation, some outfitters, all getting the word out and getting these kits available. These are really simple to do, and that's why I'm saying it right now. So this is shameless plug for the project. If there's Oklahoma folks listening to this episode, all they got to do is get in touch with us, even if they've already killed the bird and stuck the breast meat in the freezer. We just need to shave a tiny little piece of breast meat off, and that's all we need. County of harvest, date of harvest, and a little tiny tissue sample. And so we were able to get, I think it was about 125 samples turned in statewide last year from more than half. Oklahoma has 77 counties. I think we had 44 maybe represented last year. And so, of course, now there's more years coming, right? We're going to fill that in and get more and more samples. And obviously, we can provide genetic samples on the birds that we capture, but we're not capturing across the entire state. We're capturing much more localized areas. And so then the lab down there, CKWRI, they evaluate, here's how many samples are turned in. Well, how many can we actually get viable DNA extracted from, right? That's a lab process. And it wasn't 125 because you end up with problems. Something happened, or the sample was too degraded, whatever. And so I think we got near 100 of those. 90 something had viable DNA, and of those, 70 something maybe were of sufficient quality to do really advanced sequencing. So over the course of at least 2 more years of that, you're looking at hopefully hundreds of samples from a statewide distribution to look at these large landscape scale questions that might relay back to other fine scale things like Marcus was mentioned before, like these metrics like poult per hen. Well, that's coming from this nesting process, but it could be influenced by these landscape level variables that a genetic analysis could help us kind of parse out.
So I have a couple of things. One, I don't think you should have a shameless plug. Everybody listening to this, I think, are advocates of wild turkeys, and this is really great work and exciting work. And also, I wanted to throw in an additional point, reiterate the point that a lot of the successes and the conservation effort and all of that stuff, a lot of the funding is originating with hunters. Yeah. And even in this case, there's opportunity for hunters to give back again. And I'm going to say we, because all of us are hunters too. We have been leading the efforts on, conservation of the species for a long, long time. So I don't think you should be giving a shameless plug. I think we do have 2 listeners, but one of them's you in Oklahoma.
Me and Dwayne Elmore are the only ones listening.
Yeah, we probably have a few more than that, but the other thing I was going to say is I know you just recently made a new Instagram account so that you can share all this kind of information with folks. And I assume that they could reach out if people are interested in our audience. First of all, go follow at Big Game Doc, but they can reach out through that medium or through your email, which is relatively easy as well. If you want to try to help or contribute tissue samples from turkeys on your property or whatever. Make sure you reach out to do that.
That's perfect. Absolutely, that'd be awesome.
We finally brought Chitwood over to the dark side of social media.
It was all Marcus's fault.
Well, it's been a really effective way to communicate, and a lot of people are listening and contacting us through that. And I think we would be remiss not to observe that opportunity to try to get information out to people and try to get information from people too. So we do a lot of that. So
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.